Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the channel. Welcome to a Gran Turismo 7 video. We're going to take a look at the penalty system. I'm going to try and give you some tips, tricks and advice on how to get less penalties within this game. Because as you know, penalties can be race ruining if you are in a very tight race. The difference between getting, a couple of half-second penalties, a couple of track limit penalties, it can cost you a couple of positions in a race. So if you can get less of them, then you are going to give yourself an advantage over some of your competitors. Now, there is three ways of getting a penalty in Gran Turismo 7. You've got your car contact penalties, you have your track limit penalties, and you have your barrier collision penalties. And we are primarily going to take a look at the track limit penalties within this video, but I do want to touch on barrier collision and car contact penalties at the end. But as I said, the focus is going to be on track limits penalties, and I think if you kind of watch anybody play Gran Turismo 7, if you partake in any forums, if you're on any Discord channels, yeah, the penalty system gets a lot of heat from people. People get very angry and frustrated with it, and I'm not saying they're incorrect to do so. I would maybe go as far as to say it's not the right approach, because the penalty system really doesn't care whether you think it's fair or not. It doesn't really care how you ended up in a situation to pick up a penalty, like a track limit penalty or a car contact penalty or a barrier collision penalty, to be precise. It doesn't care whether you've lost time, it doesn't care whether you've got dirty tyres, it doesn't care whether you've got damage through it. All it cares about is it's got its rules, it's got its algorithm, and you've breached those rules, those algorithm, and therefore it gives you a penalty. And I believe if you kind of get into that mentality, into that mindset, and into that acceptance of the penalty system, start working with it instead of against it, then you can dramatically reduce the amount of penalties you're getting on a regular basis. So the first penalty type I want to take a look at is your classic track limits penalty. And to do that, we're going to use qualifying here, time trial section of this week's Daily Race A, which is Watkins Glen short course, and we're in the Nissan R34 Nürburgring edition. Turn 1 at Watkins Glen is a perfect example of the sort of corner where you're going to regularly pick up a track limits penalty as you drift wide and come back onto the track. So come down into turn 1 now. We're going to break around about the 300 board. We'll get the car into the apex. We're going to drift wide over this red and yellow curb, all four wheels off there. We'll keep our foot in, we rejoin the track. We come to the S's and the game allocates us a 1 second penalty for ignoring the track limits. Let's just do that once again, just to show that it's pretty much consistent if we do the same thing over and over. So all four wheels off the curb, into that zone, back onto the track, up into the S's. We pick up a 1 second penalty. So I think it's pretty much accepted at Watkins Glen, turn 1. The track limit is the left hand side of the curb there. If you go all four wheels over that curb, you're picking up a penalty. But what if I can show you that we can go all four wheels over the red and yellow curb and not pick up a penalty? So into turn 1 we go, we definitely go all four wheels over the track limit, back onto the track, coming up into the S's. You should be thinking, where's the 1 second penalty? Because it's not going to appear. And let me just show you that we can replicate that once again. So coming into turn 1, we will drift wide of the curb, all four wheels off the red and yellow curb, but no penalty is given. That's because I believe there is a line sort of further into the exit of the corner, and it's far enough down that curb that if you go all four wheels off the curb beyond this penalty forget line, you don't pick up a penalty. So there is a little bit more going on than you might think. So just again to show you, we can easily pick up the 1 second penalty if we want to. Egregiously go off the track there, rejoin it, full throttle, we pick up the 1 second penalty. No problem whatsoever. Let's come into turn 1 again though. Let's do something a little bit different. We'll go all four wheels off the track, but we're going to give a little bit of a lift of the throttle as we come back on. So we've kind of recognised we've went wide and tried to do something about it, and the game recognises it as well, because now we only get a half second penalty instead of the full 1 second penalty. Let's just replicate that once again. Off the track, a little bit of a lift, up into the S's, and the game gives us the half second penalty once again. And let's do something completely different from the previous two examples. Let's miss the apex completely. Let's go way off the track, keep our foot in, rejoin the track much further down. So we've definitely lost time in this example, and surprisingly, the game also recognises that we have lost a little bit of time. It takes a little bit longer to think about it, but only gives us a half-second penalty instead of a 1 second penalty, despite the fact we never lifted. So as I did my testing on this corner and kind of built up my knowledge as into how the game was dishing out the penalties, this is essentially what I think it goes like. We've got our track limit there at the edge of the curb on turn 1. If you go all 4 wheels over that curb into what I've deemed the penalty activated zone, you are getting a penalty. However, what you do when you leave the penalty activated zone into the penalty calculated zone, and before you get to the penalty allocated line, you can influence how bad a penalty you get. There is a certain point on the track, I believe, where if you go all 4 wheels over the track, which I've called the penalty forget line, where you don't get a penalty at all. So yeah, there's a lot more complexity going into these corners than you might first believe. So can we take that knowledge that we've picked up there and what I've just passed on, can we go into turn 1, go all 4 wheels over the track into the penalty activated zone, and can we do enough between the penalty activated zone and the penalty calculated zone before we get to the penalty allocated line and not pick up a penalty? So in this example here, we've got all 4 wheels off the track. We'd give it a big lift because we know it's a 1 second penalty that it gives us. As we come up through the S's, there is going to be no penalty because the lift that we have given has been enough. However, understanding how the track limits work, understanding how you get that penalty on a corner, having a few tips and advice on how to maybe minimise the severity of the penalty or indeed getting rid of the penalty completely is all well and good, but do you want the actual best advice on how not to get a penalty? Don't run wide. It really is that simple. I know you're thinking, we've came 7 minutes into this video, Womble, for you basically to tell me the best way to not get a track limit penalty is to not run wide. Yes, 100%. It really is that simple in a nutshell. If you give the game no chance, if you don't give the algorithm anything to think about, then you don't pick up the penalty. And honestly, if you get into the mindset of the danger corners on a track and start dealing with them in a more conservative manner, you pick up less penalties and you get better results. It really is that simple, folks. So on that bombshell, let's move on to everybody's favourite category of penalty, and that is the barrier collision penalty. You hit the barrier, you pick up a 1.5 second penalty. Probably the penalty that gets the most hate in the game, particularly if you sort of pick them up in situations like the first few examples we are looking at here, where it is a collision with another car, it's not your fault, the car ends up in the wall, and to add insult to injury, you pick up a 1.5 second penalty on top of the time lost and the dirty tyres and the damage, etc. I get it, I understand why people despise the fact that these barrier penalties are turned on, but unfortunately it is a thing and they have to be turned on sometimes, I guess, to prevent the wall riding. Now, in the first few examples we looked at Suzuka and Monza, they certainly were not the driver's fault for picking up those penalties, but a lot of the examples we're going to take a look at here in the background on Bathurst, I would say you could at least put some of the blame on the driver. In most cases, they probably realise that they've made a mess of the corner and they make no effort to kind of try and lift or slow the car down. They go into the barrier and they pick up a 1.5 second penalty. Frustrating for sure, but if you know it's a thing in the game, then it really is up to you. Going to drop some bombshells again. It really is up to you to adapt your driving. Take care on those corners where you know if you clip the barrier you pick up a penalty. Be a little bit more conservative. I would say in most examples where you pick up a barrier collision penalty, you know you've went too deep into the corner, you know you've hit the throttle too early, you know you've given the car a chance of drifting wide and hitting the barrier. So it's about getting that discipline into your driving, about lifting a little bit earlier, recognising when you've got the line a little bit wrong. And if you do that, don't try to fight the barrier penalties, just accept they're a danger in the game. Be a little bit more conservative, you'll get less of them, you'll get less frustrated, you'll get less poorer results, and yeah, I think that is really the only way to try and deal with the barrier collision penalties for those ones where you are in control. So that's barrier collision penalties, that's track limits penalties covered. Let's move on to car collision penalties. Probably, you know, in the current zone of the game, or the way the game is the sort of penalty you probably see the least of, I would say, certainly in the higher splits anyway. Maybe where there's a bit more carnage, you see a few more car collision penalties, but the penalty system in terms of contact with other cars is pretty loose at the moment. We've certainly went through many stages of penalty system through GT Sport and GT7. Certainly we've had car collision penalties that have been incredibly more harsh than what we have at the moment. I remember a penalty system where if you touched the back of the car in front of you in a braking zone, it was an instant 1 second penalty. And people just couldn't deal with it, you know. Whether it was your fault, whether anybody lost time or not, you got a 1 second penalty, and it really did kind of make you have to be very, very careful in the braking zone of when you're around other cars. It kind of, and some people just could not handle it. They just could not handle it. So PD actually reverted back to a much more loose penalty system, for want of a better word. But when it comes to car collision penalties, again, it's about kind of, you know, you're going to pick up bad car collision penalties. Like we've seen at the very beginning of the video, the guy going into the hairpin was completely blameless, but he was involved in a contact. It wasn't his fault, but the game obviously just couldn't work out who was to blame, and they gave him a 5 second penalty, or thought they were to blame, to be honest with you. It's not a case that they couldn't work out who to blame. They thought they were to blame. They gave him a 5 second penalty. In terms of car collision penalties, you are going to pick up some bad ones. It's the nature of the beast. The only thing you can try and do is when you're in kind of crazy situations like I'm in here. You know, look how messy this has been for the last lap, you know, and we've now got 5 cars on this long winding straight down into a tight corner at the end. Is to try and just, you know, go, you know what, I don't want any part of this. Eventually this is all going to go Pete Tong, and I just don't want to be part of it when it does. And eventually this kind of situation here will happen, and the gates will open and you will be through. Somewhat ironically, we pick up a half second for the barrier collision, or tapping the wall in the tunnel, but you know, we'll take a half second rather than being the 3 cars that spun off the track at the end. So when it comes to car contact penalties, you know, when you're in those situations, just back out a little bit. Hopefully the drivers around you might back out. Hopefully you're in there with some sensible people. You're not always going to be the case. Sometimes it's just going to, the proverbial will hit the fan. A car's going to bump into your car. It's not going to be your fault. You're going to pick up a bad penalty, but tell yourself it happens to everyone. But you can adjust your drive and try and put your car in sensible positions where you aren't in the firing line when it comes to these braking zones, big braking zones, etc. It'll come with experience. It doesn't come easy. It doesn't always work out that way. Another thing you'll often see is you'll see people driving straight into the scene of an accident. So you'll see an accident unfolding in front of them, and you'll just see them just not bother to try and lift the throttle or take any avoiding action, or rely on the ghosting system to take care of the problem for them. They arrive at the scene of an accident, they get hit by another car, or they hit another car, they drive on, they get a penalty, and then they go arms up in the air, that's not my fault, I didn't do anything wrong, when they probably kind of did. You know, they just drove straight into the scene of an accident without any kind of, you know, adapting their driving to try and get through the situation safely. So yeah, to wrap it up folks, this is my video on how to try and reduce the amount of penalties you get. If you can reduce the amount of penalties you get in Gran Turismo, it's only going to benefit you. And again, it really just comes down to you. It's about getting into that mindset. It's about realising the penalty system is what it is. You can say it's broken, you can say it's rubbish, you can say it's this, you can say it's that, but it is what it is in the game. It doesn't care what you think about it. You can't change it, so you can only learn to work with it, to adapt it, to understand why it dishes out penalties for particular reasons, and adapt your driving to that. And that is basically the best advice I can give you when it comes to getting less penalties in Gran Turismo 7 in all situations. Hopefully you've found this video useful in some way, shape or form, or you might well think it's just been 14 minutes of me talking complete and utter nonsense. Either way, if you want to let me know what you think of the video in the comments below, keep it civil, keep it constructive, and I'll get back to you. But thank you very much for watching. Try and get less penalties. Hopefully this video helps, and I'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye now.